here with my man Navin on March 11th. We'll rewind a little bit, talking about what your perception was before you came in. Can you start again?
Coming out of an IB program, they always told us that the first year of college would seem very easy because of the rigor and workload of IB classes. When I got to college, I think it did actually live up to that to some extent, because definitely content-wise, the college classes are a lot easier than the IB classes. It's just college has so many more moving parts, and you have to take a lot more of your own initiative. There's not a teacher telling you to turn everything in. You just have to do it yourself. It's different to have to organize yourself with that much freedom. So I think that's where I got lost a little at the beginning of college, and that's what made it harder.
You came out of a really tough IB program in Colorado, outside of Denver. You're in your second semester now, for the benefit of those people watching, at UC Davis, one of the best in the country. And you were your pick of the litter of a lot of schools. Talk a little bit about Davis and why you chose Davis and what it is that you're studying at Davis.
I'm studying biochemistry and molecular biology at Davis. I think when I was choosing, I definitely went on the west side of the country because I liked the culture a lot more on that side. But I narrowed my schools down to University of British Columbia and UC San Diego. I was gonna pull the trigger on UC San Diego, but then I decided I needed to be able to ski. So then I decided to choose between UC Davis and UBC. And then so I toured both campuses again. I just decided to go for Davis because it just seemed so much more laid back. I didn't want to be in a grindy environment like UBC. And I'm still close to skiing here. It's really lived up to that because the community here is very supportive. Everyone's so chill. And also, I have my major here for 4 years guaranteed, unlike UBC.
It's a different system in Canada. And as I remember talking to you after you and your family went up to University of British Columbia and Vancouver, and you love Vancouver. What's not to love? It's really beautiful. You talk a little bit about the differences between what your perception was of the Canadian school system versus the American school system from perspective.
Definitely seemed like the Canadian school system is very much focused on just academics and not as much recreation and fun activities.
Right.
Because I'm not really a party person. You have to have the experience a couple times. And they said there's not really any parties at UBC. There's no formals. People don't really go to the sports games. There's no homecoming rally. There's not many social events there. It's just people grinding to get the best grades. And that's not really something that I want to integrate myself into.
Yeah. No, you love the balance, and very highly seasoned competitive skier. Talk a little about your ski career, because you come from Colorado and you've been skiing all your life.
I started skiing when I was 3. My dad put me on skis. And then when I was 7 years old, I joined the Crested Butte ski team in Colorado, and I loved it. The kids there were better than me, so they pushed me to get better. When I was 10, I was able to compete in freeride. So I tried competing and I really loved it. So I kept competing until I was 18. Now I'm just skiing on my own time. But I think I do want to start competing again, probably next year, or at least get back on a ski team next year.
The fact that they have skiing at UC Davis, University of California, Davis, again, just an incredibly competitive school to get into, but one that was really one of your first choices because it had such a fantastic molecular biology.
Yeah.
They also have a ski lodge, right, which is nice.
I definitely need to ski.
And this, just for the benefit again of the audience, is from a guy who is coming off of a 2-week nasty cold, who went skiing during the cold. And there was recently, how many inches fell at the closest mountain?
127.
127 inches.
In 4 days.
So skiing is really an important part of your life. And talk about some of the courses when we were going into selecting the courses, my helping you select the courses for your freshman year. There were some astonishingly interesting electives in addition to the core courses you were taking. Can you talk about some of those electives? Because they were fantastic.
Oh, yeah. So there's some electives. People call them the Davis electives here. They're just a bunch of agricultural wacky classes. They have wild edible mushroom cultivation. They have field machinery operation, which everyone just calls
tractor driving, right? Which you haven't taken yet, but you're going to.
No, I couldn't get into it for next quarter. There's a mummy class, there's a zombie class, there's coffee class, wine class, beer class. I don't know, there's just weird electives. The philosophy electives are super weird.
What are some of those?
There's the usual ones. There's like the intro to, there's just all the intros to like scientific philosophy, political philosophy, but then there's like the philosophy of classic fairy tales.
Who knew, right? You're talking about the philosophy. There are philosophy classes.
Oh, yes.
What are some of the other philosophy classes? There's the philosophy of.
There's just the usual philosophy of science, political philosophy, but then there's also the philosophy of fairy tales. And they also have history classes too about the origins of all of the fairy tales and where they came from. I have friends taking a Vikings class. There's this class I want to get into next quarter called Art, Science, and the World of Insects.
That's really up your alley. What I'm hearing you say is this healthy balance between work and play, right? On the academic
Yeah.
side, as well as everything else, which is one of the reasons you chose Davis.
Yeah, because I'll have my art, science, world of insects, but I'll also have my calc and my bio and my chem.
And everything else. And it should be noted here, and I'm going to do a little bragging on you here. We've been working together. We just came up in 2 years, long time, a good long time,
Yeah.
but it's passed quickly. That you received collectively over a bunch of schools, not including Davis, because Davis didn't offer merit-based scholarships, although there's other ways you will go about teaching assistants and teaching assistantships and other research positions that may end up paying in course credits, which are not taxable. You ended up getting a lot of generous offers from other schools, which totaled deep six figures. Do you remember how much?
Yeah.
I think it was $300,000 or $400,000
It
range.
was like 450.
It's a lot of money,
Yeah.
$450,000. Any advice for kids or parents out there who are applying when it comes to being able to secure merit-based offers?
You can't just ask for money, of course. I think you just have to make yourself look appealing. I feel like you have to speak from your heart. And then when it comes to accepting those offers, you definitely have to listen to your heart. Because there was a point where I had to decide between taking a lot of money or coming here. I feel like in the long run, coming here would have a lot more opportunities for me.
It's great advice. One of the things that we did talk about, because $450,000 spread over a number of schools, and these were clustered. Some schools offered a lot.
Yeah.
Some of what we talked about involved kind of playing, for lack of a better term, whack-a-mole, right? Where one school will offer you something, other schools will offer you maybe less, and you had the opportunity maybe to go to that school and say, okay, another school's offered me more. Would you take that? So there's a lot of strategy involved. But in terms of speaking from your heart, can you lean into that a little bit more? Because we worked a lot on your applications and you went through a lot of transitions in that. Can you talk more about that?
I definitely think there's a lot of social pressure behind college acceptance. Not so much so in Colorado, honestly, but I've seen it a lot here. People feel very threatened by people who get into good colleges here. I've been talking to some of my friends about their high school experiences.
Hmm.
It's interesting because people here, they don't like to share their grades. They don't really lead on about, they said in high school, when someone got into Berkeley or like an Ivy, it was like they had a target on their back. It's
Talk
just,
more about that. What do you mean by that?
I think it's just telling of how competitive it is now to get into colleges to the point where people are getting envious and jealous. I think that kind of social pressure can definitely influence your decision. At the end of the day, there's probably only one or two colleges that really fit you super well. And I think you have to stay true to that.
It is really all about fit, isn't it? You
Yeah.
know, and it was for you when we went through the list of colleges to which you were applying. It really was, there were a lot of great colleges you could have applied to, but you were very specific about ones that felt right or not. And you visited all of them, right? Didn't you visit all of the colleges or was it most of the
Not
colleges?
all of, like half.
Okay. But you did a deep dive into the research
Yeah.
ones that you didn't. And what an interesting comment about it. There's a lot of fear in the air about where do I go and where do I not get out. You and I have had this discussion. I've had this discussion with your sister, who's a junior, with whom I'm working right now, as she gets ready to apply next year to schools. It's two sides of the fence, right? People are afraid they're not getting into places. And then on the other hand, what I'm hearing you saying right now is people who do get into ultra competitive places like Berkeley, like Davis, where you are right now, then maybe people get envious of them. So what an interesting comment. What I also hear you saying is that even at Davis right now, people don't talk about their grades as their.
No, it's very interesting because
Huh.
it's definitely a culture difference. In
Mhm.
Colorado, people don't care. It's
Right.
like you got a 50%, you're like, ah, I got 50%. But here it's like people don't want to let on what they got on a test unless it's an A.
Interesting. Even once they're already into one of the best
Yeah,
in the nation, and they do that.
but I feel like that's just conditioning because it sounds like that's what their high school experience was like too.
So the high school conditioning, like where you came from, and is there the people that you're talking about? Are these kids who came from schools in the United States, from overseas?
California, everyone here is from California,
Okay.
basically.
Yeah, let's just say it's state. Although there are people who come from out of state, like you. You came
Yeah,
from Colorado. We don't have the result yet, but about you have applied for research positions and we've gone through that. Can you talk a little bit about crafting a resume, crafting a cover letter, the process that you've gone through, a little bit about that for the benefit of people, because you're way ahead of the curve on this right now.
Yeah. For the resume, actually, it's quite simple. It was way simpler than I thought it would be
Mm.
because you can really just do bullet points. You have to list off the core activities of your life. You should have a little paragraph at the top of the resume about your basic interests and what you're seeking and some general information about yourself that's important. And then underneath, you should list your extracurricular. I think that that's just the most important thing about the resume is it's a short but sweet kind of thing. You definitely have to use the right words that will, I don't know, hook the reader, so to speak,
How did you go at
because
doing that in yours? What was your approach for that?
I can't think of a specific example, but I feel like when you're writing a bullet point, word choice is very important because there's some words that just fit the scenario better than others. And I think word choice actually goes a long way in conveying what you did in such a short little bullet point or blurb or
You only have a short time to grab their attention, right? And you
yeah,
use the word book.
a sentence maybe top
Was that something that you used in your applications as well?
of yeah, definitely. There's a lot of points in my applications where I was able to condense words, make them less verbose, but there was also times there was just a word that I used and there was a better word that could be used. And then when I read over it after changing the word, I was like, wow, yeah, that is better. Because the word choice, it's just the syntax of your writing is very important. I feel, especially for college, it has to be professional, but not too professional because you don't want to sound stuck up because you want to let some of yourself come through also.
You and I worked on it together, but I was a catalyst for you. Yes. You don't want to sound 50-year-old English professor. You want to sound like a 17-year-old college applicant, but you want it to be in your voice. But
Yeah.
you made a couple of interesting comments. I remember a comment you made very specifically a year and a half ago when we were working on these things. And you said something along the lines of, I'm so close to this, I can't get some distance on it. Do you remember when we talked about that? Talk about that and how working together, you were able to get some distance because your application essays were so beautiful. You wrote one about skiing. Talk a little bit about that process.
There are some points where I definitely had a bit of a writer's block on a few of my essays, especially some of the ones that I was trying to use some metaphors, let some of myself come through. I didn't
Right,
want to sound too academic because I feel like that's how I'd been trained to write in high
right,
school.
right.
Sometimes I just hit a bit of a block and I just had to take a step back. I actually just sometimes took a break from the essays and just let it marinate for a while. And then I feel like when you come back to it with a clear mind, it's a lot easier for the ideas to flow and it just makes it better. It's not always good to do everything all at once.
Beautifully said. And we did take our time, right? I do remember that because I inherited you a little bit later in the game, right? When you were going into your senior year. But we talked about the fact that you need to have these sort of, for lack of a better word, like tent poles in between, where you do some work, you let it sit, you do some work and you let it sit. And meanwhile, you were juggling a very tough and aggressive IB schedule, and there were midterms and finals coming up. Speak a little bit about that, giving those breaks in between, those rest periods, and then coming back and then looking at your writing again.
Honestly, I feel like it's analogous to just getting burnt out in school. You spend too long on the same thing, it just doesn't flow as well.
Mm,
Sometimes you just have to take a break and come back fresh
yeah,
because honestly, it's just healthier that way.
it is, right? It's like an athlete training. You're an athlete scholar, right? If you ski every
Yeah.
day, you train and train, you're going to burn out. But talk about the cover letter for a second, because you've just recently leveraged it.
Oh, yeah, the cover. I still don't fully know how to write a cover letter.
How did you go about this last one, though? You did craft a great cover letter.
Yeah, well, honestly, I looked up a template online first
Right.
and then I just tried to follow it. I
Mhm,
tried to honestly go about it the same way I would a college essay.
mhm.
I feel like there's some overlap with the resume, there's some repeat. I just I discussed my academic standing. I discussed my goals. I just highlighted some of my hobbies and interests. And then I tried to go for why I wanted to be a part of the business and how I would fit in there and why I should be there.
What was it specifically, to the degree you can talk about it? What was it you were applying for in this last round?
This one was for a pharmaceutical company in California, is for a research position at BioMarin's farm.
Okay. One of the things that we talked about recently was that very often students will wait until their sophomore or junior year to do this.
Yeah.
This came from you, not from me. I want to get a jump on this. This was in your fall semester of freshman year. Can you talk about why it's important to get a jump on this in freshman year rather than as a STEM student? And you aspire to create cancer drugs, right? To create cures.
Yeah, or any drugs.
Or any drugs at all. Because you're fascinated with pathogens. Weren't you fascinated with pathogens when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that for a second, because interest very early on in life.
The books I used to read when I was like 5, 6, 7 years old were about infectious diseases. I used to go to the library and pick up the book that was like world's 10 rarest diseases or like world's 10 deadliest pathogens.
Yeah. Not what every 5-year-old picks up. You're such a unique cat, but that's been a passion for a long time, right? So for
Yeah.
some odd years right now. Since you applied to that pharmaceutical company in California, you've since submitted to some other institutions as well.
Yeah, I've submitted to some other things in California, some other institutions in Colorado, some stuff on Davis campus.
Looking at what you're doing and at the same time giving advice to whatever degree you can as somebody who's about to finish freshman year at Davis at one of the UCs, what would be your advice to juniors and seniors who are on that kind of a track, on a STEM track, who are thinking about, boy, it would be great to get ahead of the curve and be able to apply for these things once I'm a freshman? What's your insight on that one? Because you're getting way ahead of the
Well,
curve. You've applied several times and you've already heard back some very positive information. You haven't gotten the job yet, but you're pretty close.
yeah, hopefully. We'll see. Honestly, I'm not getting my hopes up because these things are so competitive, but I'm glad they showed interest. To speak about the getting ahead of the curve is very important. If you want to go to grad school, or honestly, even if you're not going to grad school, the experience you get in undergraduate research is, I would say, just necessary if you're in STEM. If you want to get into undergraduate research, the earlier the better, because the goal is to get in as a freshman and stay in one lab for all 4 years and hopefully build a relationship with the professor who runs the lab and have your name on a paper by the end of it or multiple papers. So, really, sophomore year is the latest you can get into undergraduate research.
It's the latest, in your opinion. That's very often where undergrads start looking is sophomore year. So this is fantastic advice. Talk more about this.
Sophomore year is the latest. Even end of sophomore year is probably too late because by the time you're a junior, the professors are expecting you to be experienced already. But when you come in as a freshman, they're literally expecting nothing. They are expecting you to have zero experience. They're just expecting you to be their pupil that they can train up over 4 years to be something better. Because there's a decent chance you start research with pipetting solutions and cleaning dishes.
The equivalent of a dishwasher in a lab.
Yeah.
But you're talking about coming up to speed really fast. So if the expectation of the professors, and this is what I'm hearing, please correct me if I'm wrong, if the expectation of the professors is students come in knowing nothing their freshman year, but within a year, they better be ready to apply for starting at the bottom, but fast track it such that by the time they hit junior year, they're cranking things out, maybe even have
Yeah.
a paper. Because if they're grad school bound, which you are, you do aspire to go to graduate school.
Yes.
Is it medical school still, or where do you
I
want?
don't know. Med school or grad school. I don't really know where I stand yet.
Okay, but certainly grad school
Yes.
about your perception as an undergrad, as somebody who's finishing freshman year, about what it takes to get into a competitive grad school and what that path is.
First, you have to do testing again. You have to take the GREs if you're going to grad school. You have to take the M if you're going to med school. Grad school is ultra competitive. I haven't really seen any grad school that has over a 10% acceptance rate.
Yeah.
And I know for med school now, there's a new requirement that you have to do undergraduate research. There's a new requirement. You have to have 400 hours of clinical experience. You have to do community service. You have to keep building your resume. You have to keep your grades up. It's really competitive. I don't really know much about the application process because I haven't got into that part yet, but I do know it's very intense.
Fulfilling those hours is a lot. 400
Yeah.
hours sounds like a lot. Going back to my days in mental health and community mental health, I had to earn 3,000 hours in California. And that seemed like a ridiculous amount of time, but it goes by quickly. But as an undergrad, you're talking 400 hours with the new med school requirements, plus
Yeah.
service, plus everything else, plus keeping your grades up and applying and everything else. That's a lot of moving parts as you're an undergrad.
Yeah. And then I've heard, actually, I know now, I've attended some talks about it, but once application time comes for med school, they say you have to apply to 20 to 30 med schools
Yep.
and expect to get into probably one.
It's a really low yield rate, right? Lower even
Yeah.
than colleges, much lower than colleges. And are there interviews as well, based on what you know?
Yes, there's interviews.
Yeah. And what do you know about the nature of those interviews for med schools?
It's funny because at the beginning of the year, I attended a few like pre-med seminars,
Right.
and I heard some med students talk about their experience with the interviews. I
Yeah.
actually thought it would be purely academic, but they said they kept it formal, but it was just a laid back conversation. And they actually wanted to know a lot more about extracurricular experience than actual in school grades and academic experience. Because I think the process has become a lot more holistic and they want to know a lot more about who you are as a person as opposed to who you are as purely an academic.
Yeah, beautifully said, Navin. And this comes back to a conversation you and I have had many times. And you are of Indian heritage. You're half of Indian heritage, but you're very close to part of your. And this comes back to a conversation we had about a recent trip that I made to India and trips that you've made to India, in which this is true in the States and it's true all over the world. But the rising importance of soft skills, the ability to have conversations, active listening, emotional intelligence in the face of AI. And AI is going to dominate everything. What I'm hearing you say is that these conversations are predicated on the ability to lean into a conversation. The person may be like you, they may be completely different than you are. But
Yeah,
I'm using med school as an example. It could be engineering school, it could be vet school, it could be whatever it is. But for grad schools,
yeah,
that ability to have a conversation with anybody, that's not easy for everybody. You happen to be just
no,
really easygoing. What does it take for somebody who may not be comfortable with that, who's very formal, maybe a great student, or kids who come from outside the state? So you have somebody who you took home for over the Christmas break, who's not from this country, whose native language is not English. What would be your advice for people who are coming in from other countries whose native language may not be English to be able to get into that process? And
I think a lot of international students would cower away from an interview, especially an interview that's in English. I know now from firsthand experience that most international students here just stay to their own people. But my friend, he's an oddball in the international students. He's just hell bent on becoming an American. He's put a lot of effort into learning English, to learning American culture. At first, he was totally uncultured. He hardly knew what racism was, but now he's a lot more in touch with American culture. And he definitely can speak English now fluently. There's still a word that he doesn't know here and there, but honestly, I think if international students immerse themselves in the language and the culture, they'll learn it very quickly. I actually think that my friend, he would probably still be scared of an interview, but I think people take interviews for as a lot bigger than I don't, it's not that big. I think people get really nervous for them. You just have to be yourself, not a test. You just have to go in and have a conversation.
it's a conversation, right?
Yeah, which
I've got
obviously there are stakes, which can make it a bit nerve-wracking, but really, you don't have to worry because I feel like if you worry too much, you'll just do worse.
It's like the anticipation that it might go wrong could affect the
Yeah,
achievement, right? Would your advice to foreign students from any country, whether it's Asia, the Middle East, other countries, Latin America, who stick with their own kind, who only stay with that group, be to intermingle with American students, just to immerse themselves in the culture? Because it's not just about linguistic fluency, it's about cultural fluency as well. You and I are going to be working together on that next year, right? When you come to
yeah,
with me and you'll be peer mentoring to other people and helping them adjust. I always loved working with you when you were getting into college, and I love working with you now that you are in college. What we talked about earlier today just made my heart smile with this cover letter that you wrote and this resume that you wrote. We'll have to have another interview soon when you hear positive news from one or more of these things to which you submitted.
yes.
Thanks so much, Navin. So that's it for now. Navin and I are going to wave goodbye to the audience, and then we'll click off. Bye for now.